The Phoenix Feather Scroll. In a small town nestled between rolling hills and ancient forests, there lived a librarian named Elena Morgan. Her world consisted of worn book spines, the gentle whisper of turning pages, and the subtle scent of aging paper that filled the town's century-old library. Elena found comfort in organizing books and helping others discover stories that might change their lives, just as books had changed hers countless times before. One particularly misty autumn morning, while organizing a collection of donated books, Elena discovered an unusual leather-bound journal tucked between two weathered novels. The journal's cover bore strange symbols that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. As she carefully opened its pages, a letter slipped out, written in elegant, flowing script that appeared to shimmer in the soft library light. The letter spoke of an ancient temple perched atop Mount Luminous, a peak that no map had ever captured. According to the mysterious writer, the temple housed a sacred scroll penned with a feather from the immortal phoenix itself. The scroll, it was said, held the secret of personal transformation, the ability to rise from one's own ashes and emerge renewed, just as the legendary Firebird did. Elena might have dismissed the tale as mere fantasy, but something about the letter resonated deep within her soul. Her life had grown predictable, comfortable yet somehow incomplete. The endless rows of books that once brought her joy now felt like walls holding her back from experiencing her own story. That evening, as autumn leaves danced past her window, Elena began researching Mount Luminous. To her surprise, she discovered subtle references to the mountain in various cultural texts, always described as a place visible only to those seeking profound change. Some accounts mentioned travelers who had glimpsed its peaks through morning mist, while others spoke of the mountain appearing in dreams. As weeks passed, Elena found herself drawn to the old hiking trails beyond the town's borders. Each morning before work, she would walk a little further into the wilderness, feeling something pulling her forward. The autumn air grew crisper, and the morning mist seemed to whisper ancient secrets as she explored. During one of her morning walks, Elena encountered an elderly woman named May sitting beside the trail. May's silver hair caught the early sunlight, and her eyes held a wisdom that seemed to transcend time. The old woman was gathering herbs in a hand-woven basket, and as Elena approached, May looked up with a knowing smile. May shared stories of the mountain's legends, speaking of how generations of seekers had searched for the temple. She explained that the path to Mount Luminous revealed itself only to those who were truly ready for transformation. The journey, May told her, began not with a physical step but with an inner awakening, a willingness to leave behind the comfort of the known and embrace the mystery of becoming. Elena listened intently as May described how the temple guardians had protected the Phoenix Feather Scroll through centuries. These guardians were neither monks nor warriors, but ordinary people who had undergone their own transformations and chosen to stay, helping others find their way. As the morning light strengthened, May gathered her herbs and prepared to leave. Before departing, she pressed a small, smooth stone into Elena's palm. The stone was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with a gentle energy. May explained that when the stone grew hot, it would mean Elena was ready to begin her journey to Mount Luminous. In the days that followed, Elena found herself returning to the trail, sometimes sitting in the spot where she had met May, contemplating the choice before her. The stone remained cool in her pocket, but its presence reminded her of the possibility that awaited. She began to notice subtle changes in her daily life. Colors seemed more vivid, the whispers of wind through trees carried clearer messages, and the books in her library began to reveal deeper meanings. Each evening, Elena would return home to her small apartment above the bookshop, where her cat Perseus would greet her with knowing eyes. She would sit by her window, watching the stars emerge, and feel the weight of the stone in her pocket. The comfortable life she had built now felt like a chrysalis, safe but confined, familiar yet restricting. As autumn deepened toward winter, Elena started to prepare herself, though she wasn't quite sure for what. She began taking longer walks, learning about the local plants and their uses, studying old maps, and reading everything she could find about personal transformation. The stone in her pocket remained her constant companion, a reminder that change would come when she was truly ready. One particularly clear evening, as Elena sat reading by candlelight, Perseus suddenly perked up his ears and stared intently out the window. Following his gaze, Elena noticed a strange glow on the horizon, a soft golden light that seemed to pulse like a distant heartbeat. The stone in her pocket grew warm for the first time, and in that moment, she knew her journey was about to begin. That night, as the stone grew warmer against her skin, Elena felt a subtle shift in the air around her. The golden glow on the horizon seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and Perseus, her faithful feline companion, moved to sit by the window, his tail swishing gently back and forth. The familiar confines of her apartment felt different somehow, as if the walls themselves were breathing with ancient magic. While preparing for sleep, Elena noticed small changes throughout her home. The shadows cast by her candles seemed to form mysterious patterns on the walls, and the spines of her beloved books appeared to shimmer with an inner light. As she drifted off to sleep, the warm stone resting on her bedside table, her dreams were filled with images of winding mountain paths and golden feathers floating on the wind. She awoke before dawn to find Perseus sitting alert at the foot of her bed, his eyes reflecting an unusual gleam. The stone had grown warmer still, and as Elena held it, she felt a gentle pulling sensation toward the mountains beyond the town. Understanding that the time had come, she began to pack with careful consideration. Into her old leather backpack went only the essentials: some dried fruit and nuts, a water bottle, a warm sweater, the mysterious journal, and a small notebook of her own. As the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, Elena made her way through the sleeping town. The streets were empty save for the morning mist that curled around her ankles like a living thing, seeming to guide her steps toward the wilderness. The library, her sanctuary for so many years, stood silent as she passed, its windows reflecting the growing light like knowing eyes. At the edge of town, where the paved road gave way to old hiking trails, Elena paused to look back. The familiar skyline of her home looked different in the early morning light, as if she were seeing it for the first time, or perhaps the last time. The warm stone in her pocket pulsed gently, reminding her of the path ahead. As she ventured deeper into the wilderness, Elena noticed that the usual trail markers had changed. Ancient symbols, similar to those on the journal's cover, now appeared carved into trees and rocks. These symbols seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles, sometimes appearing as arrows, other times as intricate patterns that spoke of hidden pathways. The morning mist began to take on unusual shapes as she walked, forming subtle archways and corridors through the trees. The forest itself seemed to be awakening to her presence, with leaves turning to follow her movement and branches gently bending to clear her path. Small creatures, birds with unusually bright feathers and squirrels with silvery fur, appeared to guide her way, always staying just ahead, leading her deeper into the unknown. As the sun climbed higher, Elena came upon a clearing she had never seen before, despite her many morning walks in these woods. In the center stood an ancient well, its stones covered in moss and vines that seemed to glow with a faint inner light. Beside the well sat a familiar figure, May, the herb gatherer, though something about her appearance had changed. Her silver hair now held streaks of gold, and her simple gardening clothes had been replaced by robes that shifted color with each movement. May greeted Elena with a warm smile, explaining that this well marked the true beginning of the path to Mount Luminous. The water within, May told her, was known as the Mirror of Intent. Those who wish to find the temple must first look into its depths and see their true reflection, not their physical appearance, but the shape of their innermost desires and fears. With gentle encouragement from May, Elena approached the well. The stone in her pocket had grown almost hot now, its warmth spreading through her body like liquid sunlight. As she leaned over the ancient stones, the water below began to shift and swirl, creating patterns that seemed to reach into her very soul. In the well's depths, Elena saw images from her life, moments of joy and sadness, opportunities taken and missed, dreams both realized and abandoned. She saw herself surrounded by books, safe within their pages, but also saw how this safety had become a kind of barrier, protecting her from the uncertainty of real adventure. The reflection showed her both what she was and what she could become, like two overlapping images gradually merging into one. As she gazed into the water, Elena began to understand that the path to Mount Luminous was more than a physical journey. The temple might exist on some distant peak, but the true transformation would begin here, in the depths of her own reflection. The water seemed to respond to this realization, its surface beginning to glow with a soft golden light similar to the one she had seen on the horizon. May approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. She explained that the well's water was both a mirror and a map. Those who truly saw themselves within its depths would find that the path to the temple became clear in their hearts. The physical way might still be challenging, but their inner compass would guide them true. As the morning light filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows on the well's ancient stones, Elena felt a profound shift within herself. The comfortable routine of her old life seemed to fall away like autumn leaves, revealing new possibilities beneath. The stone in her pocket pulsed once more, its warmth now feeling like a familiar friend rather than a mysterious signal. May handed Elena a small flask filled with water from the well, explaining that she should drink from it when the path ahead seemed unclear. The water would help her remember what she had seen in her reflection and remind her of the transformation she sought. The herb gatherer's eyes held both wisdom and encouragement as she prepared Elena for the next stage of her journey. Beyond the well, the forest began to change subtly. The trees grew taller, their bark taking on a silvery sheen, and the air became thick with the scent of ancient magic. The path ahead wound through groves where flowers bloomed in impossible colors, their petals seeming to catch and hold the morning light. Each step Elena took felt somehow significant, as if the very earth beneath her feet was responding to her presence. The stone in her pocket had settled into a constant warmth, like a small sun against her skin. Its heat seemed to spread through her body in waves, making her more aware of everything around her, the whisper of wind through leaves, the distant call of strange birds, and the subtle movements of unseen creatures in the underbrush. As the day progressed, Elena noticed that time seemed to flow differently here. The sun remained constant in the sky, creating an endless golden afternoon that felt both timeless and intimate. The light filtered through the canopy in ways that defied normal physics, creating patterns that seemed to form maps and messages before dissolving back into ordinary sunshine. She came upon a series of standing stones, each one taller than the last, arranged in a spiral pattern that led toward a steep incline. The stones were covered in the same shifting symbols she had seen in the journal, but here they moved more freely, rearranging themselves as she watched. Elena realized they were telling stories, ancient tales of others who had sought the temple, each with their own reason for seeking transformation. As she followed the spiral path between the stones, Elena began to feel the weight of her old life lifting from her shoulders. Memories of her daily routine in the library, once so central to her identity, now felt like scenes from a book she had read long ago. The person who had lived that life seemed increasingly distant, like a character in one of her beloved stories rather than herself. The path grew steeper, and the air became thinner, yet Elena found herself moving with unexpected ease. Her body seemed to know exactly where to step, how to balance, when to rest. The flask of well water hung at her hip, occasionally catching the light and sending rainbow reflections dancing across the rocks. As afternoon merged into evening, though the golden light remained unchanged, Elena encountered a grove of trees unlike any she had seen before. Their leaves were transparent like crystal, and within each one swirled miniature galaxies of light and color. As she passed beneath their branches, she could hear them singing in voices just beyond the edge of understanding, their melody weaving together with the pulse of the warm stone and the beating of her own heart. In this grove, Elena met a young deer with silver-white fur and eyes that held the same wisdom she had seen in May's gaze. The creature approached her without fear, touching its nose gently to the pocket where she kept the stone. Through this contact, Elena understood that the deer was one of the temple's guardians, taking this form to guide worthy seekers along their path. The deer led her to a small pool fed by a spring that seemed to flow upward rather than down. Here, Elena was encouraged to rest and refresh herself. As she sat beside the pool, the deer communicated to her through gentle movements and knowing looks that the next part of her journey would require her to leave behind not just the physical aspects of her old life, but also her old ways of thinking and perceiving the world. While she rested, Elena noticed that the trees around the pool bore fruit that looked like drops of frozen starlight. The deer indicated that she should eat one, and when she did, her senses expanded in extraordinary ways. She could suddenly see the flows of energy that connected everything around her, the threads of light that ran through the earth, the patterns of wind in the air, and the subtle connections between all living things. With her enhanced perception, Elena began to understand that Mount Luminous itself was more than just a mountain. It was a living entity, one that had existed since the world was young, watching and waiting for those ready to undergo true transformation. The temple at its peak was both a destination and a doorway, a place where the physical and spiritual worlds overlapped. The deer led her to a path that spiraled up the mountainside, marked by stones that glowed with an inner light. As they ascended, Elena noticed that the air around them began to shimmer with golden motes of light, like tiny fragments of the sun itself. These motes seemed attracted to her, dancing around her in complex patterns before settling on her skin and clothes, giving her a subtle golden glow. As they climbed higher, the landscape became increasingly surreal yet somehow more real than anything Elena had ever experienced. Flowers bloomed in mid-air, their roots drawing sustenance from the light itself. Clouds formed bridges and archways overhead, solid enough to cast shadows but ethereal enough to see through. The boundary between earth and sky began to blur, creating a space where normal rules of nature gave way to a higher order of reality. The final ascent to the temple unfolded in a landscape that existed somewhere between dreams and reality. The path beneath Elena's feet became increasingly transparent, revealing layers of light and energy flowing like rivers beneath the surface of the mountain. The silver deer continued to guide her, its hooves leaving traces of starlight with each step. As they neared the summit, the air itself began to change, becoming thick with shifting colors and distant echoes of phoenix song. The stone in Elena's pocket had grown so warm it seemed to hover between solid and liquid, its energy flowing through her entire being. Her body felt increasingly light, as if the boundary between herself and the surrounding air was growing thin. The temple revealed itself gradually, emerging from the golden mist like a dream taking physical form. Its architecture defied ordinary geometry, with spires that seemed to pierce the sky and walls that rippled like water while remaining perfectly solid. The entire structure was built from a material that looked like opal but felt like sunlight given form, its surface constantly shifting with rainbow colors. At the temple's entrance, Elena found a gathering of other guardians, people like May who had made their own transformative journeys and chosen to remain as guides for future seekers. They welcomed her without words, their presence conveying both acknowledgement and encouragement. The silver deer touched its nose to her hand one final time before melting away into streams of starlight. The temple's interior was a single vast chamber that seemed larger than the mountain itself. The walls were lined with shelves containing countless scrolls, each one glowing with its own inner light. But at the chamber's center, floating in a column of golden light, was the scroll Elena had been seeking, the one written with the phoenix's feather. As Elena approached the scroll, she noticed that her footsteps left ripples in the air, like stones dropped into a still pond. The guardians formed a circle around her, their presence creating a sacred space for what was to come. The scroll itself seemed to pulse with life, its surface shimmering with colors that existed somewhere beyond the visible spectrum. When Elena reached for the scroll, it floated gently into her hands. The parchment felt warm and alive, like touching the surface of a sun that had cooled just enough to hold. As she unrolled it, she realized that the writing upon it was not made of ordinary ink but of living flame, words that moved and danced across the surface, each one containing entire worlds of meaning. Reading the Phoenix Feather Scroll was unlike reading any book Elena had encountered in her years as a librarian. The words didn't simply enter her mind, they flowed into her entire being, awakening something that had always existed within her but had lain dormant until this moment. Each sentence was a key unlocking another level of awareness, another layer of transformation. The scroll's message was both profoundly simple and infinitely complex. It spoke of how true transformation requires not the destruction of the old self, but its complete embrace and transcendence. Like the phoenix, one must fully accept what one is before becoming something new. The scroll revealed that every ending contains within it the seeds of a new beginning, and that transformation is not a single event but an eternal dance of becoming. As Elena absorbed these truths, she began to feel the change taking hold. It began as a warmth in her center, like the stone in her pocket had somehow migrated into her heart. This warmth spread outward, transforming everything it touched. Her perception expanded until she could see not just the physical world, but the countless layers of reality that existed alongside it. The guardians began to sing, their voices weaving together with the distant echo of phoenix song. The sound seemed to accelerate Elena's transformation, each note helping to dissolve the boundaries between what she had been and what she was becoming. The golden motes of light that had gathered around her during her ascent now began to sink into her skin, becoming part of her essential nature. In this moment of transformation, Elena understood that she had not really left her old life behind, rather, she had expanded beyond its limitations while retaining all that made it precious. Her love of books and stories remained, but now she could see how they were part of a larger pattern, threads in the infinite tapestry of existence. Her role as a keeper of knowledge had not ended but evolved into something far more profound. As the transformation completed itself, Elena found that she could see the mountain, the temple, and herself from countless perspectives simultaneously. She was still Elena, but she was also something more, a being who could rise from the ashes of her old self again and again, each time gathering wisdom from what had come before. The guardians approached her then, no longer as guides but as equals. They shared with her the final truth, that the temple would now be as much her home as her beloved library had been. She would return to the world below, carrying the phoenix's gift within her, but she would also remain here, helping others find their way to transformation. As the endless golden afternoon began to fade into a sunset that painted the sky in impossible colors, Elena felt a deep peace settle over her. She had found what she sought, though it was not quite what she had expected. The Phoenix Feather Scroll had taught her that transformation was not an escape from who she was, but an endless expansion of who she could become.